it bewilders us that what the policy you're using is called neoliberalism. This is not the liberalism of Adam Smith. This is not the liberalism of John Stuart Mill or the other classical liberals. Their objective was to bring prices in line with the actual cost of production, with cost value. Their objective was to free Europe from the free lunch that the invaders of Europe, the Viking invaders, had 1,000 years ago, when they carved up the land and gave themselves the rent instead of the community. When they, the objective of the liberals in the 19th century was to regulate monopolies, to keep them in the public domain, and to provide the services of basic needs, communications, roads, transportation, education, at as low a cost as possible. In the United States, the first the first business school was the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. The first professor there, Simon Patton, said that public infrastructure, public enterprise, was a fourth factor of production, besides labor, land, and capital. And unlike labor, which wants wages, unlike landowners who want to rent, and unlike capital who want interest and profits, the purpose of public investment in education and roads is not to make a profit, but to lower the overall price level. Instead, Latvia has followed a policy of maximizing the price level. When you tax labor, you make employers pay twice as much for labor. And so by just shifting the tax off, you'd cut your cost of production for 50%. You would make Latvia the most competitive country in the Baltics. But it goes even further of that. If you were to tax, shift the tax off labor onto land, you would reduce the price of housing. And that is because right now, Latvian prosperity has created a large real estate boom, and the rental value is high throughout the land. We've been walking through Jūrmala the last few days. There's an immense rental value. But because this value is not taxed, because it's taxed at less than 1%, all of this rental value is pledged to the banks for loans. Now, if this rental value, which is not created by the owners, was taxed away, then that would not be available to be paid to the banks. Housing prices would come down. The price of buildings would come down. We were told at the bank regulators that 40% on average of Latvian family budgets go to pay rent. This in Germany, it's 20%. And it used to be 20% in most countries. 25% was the rule of thumb when I was working in banking almost 50 years ago. So you could cut the cost of your labor by 75% without reducing living standards at all, without reducing labor's take-home rates. You have it in your power to make Latvia a highly competitive country by shifting the tax off land onto labor. That's what Hong Kong and Singapore did. If you want to be, as you'll hear later about Hong Kong and Singapore and how they tax labor at only 15%, this is indeed how you become more competitive. So our program is to tax land, not labor. And in terms of the financial budget, which we'll be discussing this afternoon, to essentially fund your own budget. You do not have to borrow foreign currency for domestic spending. You have to borrow foreign currency to pay for imports, and right now to pay for debt service. But much of Latvia's borrowing is unnecessary and wouldn't occur in the United States or other countries. The problem here is that the neoliberals are centralized planners. They say they're against planning, but they're against government planning. Every economy is planned since the Stone Age, when people began to plant crops. The calendar is a plan. Every family budget is a plan. Every government has a kind of plan. The question is, who is going to do society's planning? And today the question is, will it be planned by elected officials in the government, or will it be planned by the banks? So the neoliberal criticism of government direction, and the criticism of Europe, the criticism of Japan, the criticism of North America, the criticism of every successful developed economy who said, don't let the government plan, let our banks plan. Well, you've seen what happened for the last 20 years of the banks that planned Latvian development. They've run you into debt. They've run you into a balance of payments deficit, a trade deficit. They've made you dependent on foreign banks and foreign suppliers, and they say that's the model, and it's going to get worse and worse. And you've seen the Greeks rebel. You've seen the Icelanders rebel. We're here to tell you that this is not classical economics. This is anti-classical economics, and the alternative we're giving is the very alternative that Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and the people who were the patron saints of the neoliberals claim as patron saints, but they don't tell you what they actually said. What you've got is a travesty. I'll give you an example. In the United States, the income tax was introduced in 1913. Only 1% of Americans had to file a tax return. The idea was only the wealthy had to pay a tax. And the idea was that there was an argument, should we tax the land or should we tax wealth? And the Congress decided, well, since most wealthy people own land and monopolies in finance, economic rent, not a cost of production, that if we only tax the richest 1%, that will be the equivalent. So that was the intention of the original American income tax. For the next 100 years almost, the vested interests have fought back, and I've described this. I do have a website, michael-hudson.com, and in Australia, one of the articles I have is on the Counter-Enlightenment, where I summarize what Adam Smith and the liberals said.